It was a cold morning on October 27, 1994, just 4 days before Halloween, when a little girl named Sabrina entered the world in the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio. For many, the birth of a child is a symbol of hope and new beginnings, but the start of Sabrina's life was marked by shadows. Her biological parents, caught in a cycle of alcoholism and abuse, were unprepared to care for a child. From a very young age, Sabrina was placed into the foster care system, a place where vulnerable children often get lost amid bureaucracies and temporary homes. She was just another child among many, waiting for a chance at a better life. Then Lisa Knoefel entered her life. Lisa was not just any social worker. She was a woman dedicated to protecting and caring for children who had experienced deep trauma, especially those who had suffered sexual abuse. When Lisa met Sabrina, she saw more than just a wounded child. She saw a girl with potential, someone who, with the right support, could have a bright future. With her heart full of hope, Lisa decided that Sabrina would not just be another child in the system. She adopted her, bringing her into her home and her family. If this story outraged you, don't just stand there. Like the video and share it. The more people know this truth, the more voices will rise up. We cannot accept that this continues to happen. Suddenly, Sabrina's life seemed to take a complete turn. She now had a family that loved her. Lisa, her new mother, Kevin Knoefel, her adoptive father, and 2 adoptive sisters, Megan and another younger girl. Their home was a refuge, a place where Sabrina could finally feel safe and loved. She had everything a child could want: a united family, a roof over her head, and a future that seemed promising. Sabrina believed that, at last, her life was on the right track. However, behind this facade of happiness, something dark was forming. Gradually, Sabrina's behavior began to change. She started to distance herself from her family, and her relationship with Lisa, which had once been filled with affection and protection, began to deteriorate. No one could imagine what was to come. On the night of August 6, 2014, what appeared to be an ordinary family was shattered by a tragic event. Sabrina, now 18 years old, was found by the police in the Knoefel home, holding a bloodied knife. Lisa, her adoptive mother, had been brutally stabbed to death. The scene was terrifying. The young Sabrina, who had been rescued from a life of abuse and neglect, was now at the center of a horrific crime. The news shocked everyone who knew the family. How could a girl who had been rescued from such a difficult life commit such a violent act against the person who gave her a second chance? Friends and neighbors refused to believe it. The Sabrina we know would never do something like this, they said. She could never be capable of such violence. But as the police investigated the case, another figure began to emerge at the center of the story. Kevin Knoefel, Lisa's husband and Sabrina's adoptive father, soon became a key player in the investigation. There were secrets in that house that no one could have imagined. The police began to question whether Sabrina had truly acted alone or if she had been manipulated by someone closer. However, the only person who knew exactly what happened that night was Megan Zanella, Sabrina's adoptive sister. Megan, who was only 13 years old at the time, was in the house during the murder. She was the first to call 911, her voice trembling with fear as she reported that something terrible had happened. Megan tried to fight Sabrina, but with her young age and limited strength, she was quickly overpowered. She watched helplessly as her mother was attacked. The minutes that followed Megan's call were the longest of her life. While waiting for the police to arrive, fear and anguish overtook her. When the sirens finally began to wail in the distance, Megan ran out of the house, desperate to find the officers. But in a tragic confusion, the agents, seeing her covered in blood and in a panic, thought she was Sabrina. They pointed their guns at the girl, further escalating the terror of the situation. Megan, in tears, waved her arms frantically, shouting for them to hurry. Inside the house, the silence was terrifying. The police, after realizing the mistake, cautiously entered, calling for Lisa and Sabrina. But the only response they received was the echo of their own footsteps. When they finally climbed the stairs and entered the first room, the scene they found was pure horror. Sabrina was there, covered in blood, holding the knife that had taken Lisa's life. Sabrina's story, which began with the promise of a new beginning, ended tragically. The subsequent trial revealed dark secrets about the family dynamics and raised questions about Kevin Knoeffel's role in it all. But for Megan, the sister who witnessed everything up close, the pain of losing her mother and the betrayal by her adoptive sister was something she would carry forever. It all started with a tension that felt like it lasted an eternity, but in reality, It unfolded in a matter of seconds. Officer Randy Mullinax entered the house and saw the scene. Sabrina, standing in the middle of the room, holding a knife with a blood-stained blade. His heart raced. He and his partner shouted, ordering her to drop the knife. For a moment, Sabrina stood still, her eyes fixed on the officer, as if she were in a trance. The silence was almost unbearable. Then, finally, she dropped the knife, and it fell to the floor with a dull thud, raising her hands in surrender. His partner quickly handcuffed her and took her outside. Meanwhile, Randy approached the bed. What he saw there was something that would never leave his memory. Lisa Knoefel, the woman he had been called to protect, was lying there, completely covered in blood. He knew, with a tightness in his chest, that there was nothing more that could be done for her. But the horror of that night was far from over. Suddenly, he heard a sound coming from a corner of the room, a low and desperate cry. Randy turned his head and realized the sound was coming from a closet. He opened the door and found a very small girl, curled up and crying in fear. It was Haley, the youngest daughter of Lisa and Kevin Knoefel. She had hidden there, trying to escape the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. The sight of the child, so fragile and scared, made Randy's heart ache even more. He picked her up in his arms, trying to calm her, but he knew that the trauma of that night would stay with her forever. If you want to be part of something bigger, don't waste any time. Subscribe to the channel now. Each video brings information that can change the way you see the world. Don't let these stories go unnoticed. Click the subscribe button and activate the notification bell. Your presence here makes all the difference. At the station, Sabrina seemed distant, as if she were in another world. She tried to act as if she didn't remember anything that had happened. But that changed when the detectives brought in Megan and Haley, the two sisters who had witnessed the horror of that night. Upon seeing them, Sabrina's facade began to crumble. She could no longer pretend that none of it was real. But to understand how everything came to this point, we need to go back to the beginning of the story. Lisa Knoefel was not just a mother. She was a dedicated social worker who spent her days helping children in at-risk situations. That's how she met Sabrina, a 16-year-old girl who had never had a real family. Sabrina had gone through various foster homes, never finding a place where she felt safe or loved. When Lisa met her, something in her heart was deeply touched. She saw in Sabrina a girl who needed affection, stability, and a home. Lisa decided that she and her husband, Kevin, could be that family for Sabrina. They had already taken in other children before, and Lisa believed she could give Sabrina the love and support she desperately needed. Megan, Lisa's biological daughter, remembers well the day Sabrina arrived. She seemed so cool, Megan recalls. I thought she would be like an older sister to me. And at first, everything seemed to be going well. Sabrina attended school, got good grades, and participated in counseling sessions to deal with her past traumas. She was thriving in her new home, growing closer to Megan, Haley, and even Kevin, her stepfather. However, over time, something began to change. Kevin, who had previously seemed like a caring father, started spending more and more time alone with Sabrina. He distanced himself from the family and gradually formed a strange bond with the girl. Lisa, who worked with sexual abuse cases in her profession, began to feel that something was wrong. She tried to talk to Kevin, texting him, but he always downplayed the situation, saying that Lisa was overreacting. Megan also began to notice that the relationship between Sabrina and Kevin was changing. Something didn't seem right, she thought. Lisa, with her experience, knew that something very wrong was happening, but she had no way to prove it. Sabrina, who had never known a stable family, seemed to be getting manipulated. Kevin, who should have been a protective father, was actually taking advantage of Sabrina's vulnerabilities. Lisa began to consider divorcing Kevin and sending Sabrina back to the foster care system. But Kevin insisted they wait until Sabrina finished high school. In the meantime, Lisa took steps to protect Sabrina from what she believed was a dangerous situation. She imposed stricter rules, trying to keep Sabrina at home and away from Kevin. But the more Lisa tried to protect Sabrina, the more the situation became unsustainable. And so it was that, on that fateful night, everything exploded. The tension that had been building for months finally reached its breaking point, and what should have been a safe and loving home turned into a scene of horror. Sabrina, who had been welcomed by Lisa with so much care and hope, was now at the center of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The story of Sabrina and Lisa is a reminder of how love, even when well-intentioned, can be distorted by secrets and manipulation. In the end, The tragedy that unfolded in that house was not just the end of a life, but the collapse of a family that once believed they could overcome anything together. Things started to get strange when Lisa began to distance Sabrina from her sisters, Megan and Haley. The house, which had once been peaceful, became filled with tension. Sabrina, who had previously gotten along with everyone, was now arguing with Lisa and even with Megan, the younger sister. Things began to worsen, and no one imagined where it would all lead. Megan, even though she was young, started to realize that something was wrong. One night, while they were having dinner, she noticed that Sabrina was receiving a lot of text messages. Her phone kept vibrating, and it continued late into the night, even after everyone had gone to bed. Suddenly, around 1 a.m., the noise from the phone stopped. But shortly after, Megan heard something much worse, a high-pitched scream that broke the silence of the house. She ran to see what was happening. When she got there, she saw a scene she would never forget. Sabrina was on top of her mother, Lisa, stabbing her repeatedly. Megan, only 13 years old, shouted, "Get off her!" She tried to pull Sabrina away by throwing herself onto her, but Sabrina pushed her away with force. Desperate, Megan ran to the office and called 911, trying to explain the situation to the operator while still hearing her mother's screams. Those 6 minutes felt like an eternity. Megan struggled with Sabrina, trying to protect her mother, but nothing seemed to work. After that, Megan's life would never be the same. "I have nightmares every night," she says. "The flashbacks won't stop. It's like I'm reliving that moment all the time." After the attack, Sabrina was arrested and taken to the hospital because her hands were covered in cuts from the struggle with Lisa and Megan. After being treated, the police took her to the station to begin the interrogation. They knew that Sabrina had done it. After all, they caught her in the act. But what they wanted to understand was the motive. For over an hour, Sabrina insisted that she didn't remember anything. She said she had taken too much ibuprofen, passed out, and only woke up in the hospital, not knowing what had happened to Lisa. Detective Parmenter, a veteran, knew that Sabrina was hiding something. He noticed that during the interrogation, she was scratching her forehead for no apparent reason. When people touch their face or become restless, it's a sign that they're nervous or lying, he explained. Despite this, Sabrina revealed nothing useful. Many at the station thought there was no need to investigate further since she had been caught in the act. But Parmenter felt that something more was going on. So, he decided to call Kevin, Lisa's husband, for an interview. To his surprise, Kevin requested that his lawyer, Michael Connick, be present, and the lawyer declined the interview on Kevin's behalf. This left Parmenter intrigued. Why didn't Kevin want to help? Why was the lawyer being so defensive? Something didn't add up. To try to convince Kevin to show up, Parmenter made up a pretext, saying they only wanted to talk about Lisa's work. When Kevin finally appeared, the police noticed something strange. His reaction when they brought Sabrina into the conversation was completely unexpected. Up to that point, the detective was unaware of the unusual relationship between Kevin and Sabrina. After that, Kevin took care of Megan for a few days until Megan's biological father came to take her away from that house, which now seemed filled with secrets and tragedies. This story, which began with good intentions, ended up becoming a nightmare for everyone involved. Megan was only 13 years old, but she had lived enough to know that something was very wrong. It all started the day after her mother, Lisa, was murdered. Kevin, her stepfather, seemed to be acting strangely, as if he hadn't just lost his wife. The next day, he was already getting rid of her things, Megan recalled. "My mom didn't die of an illness. She was murdered, and it all happened so fast that I could hardly believe it." On that same day, while Megan was still trying to understand what had happened, Kevin was on the phone with the insurance company. 6 months earlier, he had transferred the insurance coverage for himself and the children to Lisa, increasing her protection fourfold. When he hung up the phone, he had already withdrawn over $785,000. For Megan, this was shocking. He took the money the very next morning. It was a lot of money, and he spent it all on cars, a trailer, and renovating the house. All with my mom's insurance money. But things got even stranger. During that week, Kevin tried to visit Sabrina, the adopted daughter who was imprisoned for Lisa's murder, every day. However, he was denied every time. Megan couldn't understand why he was so insistent. Then, the next day, something even more disturbing happened. Kevin entered the room where Lisa had been stabbed to death, carrying an axe. He was cutting up the bed where my mom died. I thought that was very, very strange. Even when Megan moved in with her biological father, the doubts continued to torment her. At her mother's funeral, Kevin did something that made her even more uncomfortable. He asked everyone to pray for Sabrina, the girl who supposedly killed Lisa. Megan watched Kevin closely. I looked at him, and he showed no emotion. It was as if my mom had never existed. His wife was murdered, and he didn't even cry? That was very strange. It was at that moment I knew he was involved. Months passed, and the case seemed to be cooling down. Sabrina remained in prison, but no one could understand the real motive behind the crime. Megan and Detective Parmenter knew that Sabrina had committed the murder, but the why was still up in the air. Kevin, on the other hand, continued to act increasingly suspicious. Then an unexpected twist occurred. Sabrina, still in prison, agreed to speak with prosecutor Karen Knoefel through a process called a proffer. This was the moment when Sabrina would have the chance to tell the whole truth, leaving nothing hidden. Knoefel and Parmenter knew that Sabrina was trying to protect someone. But who? As the investigation progressed, the truth began to emerge, and it was much worse than Megan could have imagined. Kevin, the man who was supposed to protect his family, was actually a predator. He had spent months manipulating Sabrina, a 17-year-old girl, with gifts, secrets, and attention, making her feel special and dependent on him. Sabrina, who seemed to be the only guilty one, was actually being used as a puppet in a much darker game. When Megan learned this, everything made sense. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. Kevin was not just a strange stepfather. He was responsible for all that tragedy. And now, Megan knew that her intuition had been right from the start. Kevin had destroyed her family, and Sabrina, the girl everyone thought was the only guilty one, was just another victim of his cruel plan. The story of Megan, Kevin, and Sabrina was not just about a crime. It was about manipulation, betrayal, and a girl's struggle to understand the truth behind her mother's death. A truth that, in the end, would reveal the darkest side of someone who was supposed to be trustworthy. Have you ever been in a real danger situation or something similar to what happens in this video? Share your experience in the comments. We want to know how it was and how you dealt with it. Sabrina was just a teenager when Kevin, her stepfather, started promising her a bright future. He said he would help her get into a massage therapy school and that she should start training with him. At first, it all seemed like an opportunity. But gradually, Kevin's true intentions began to surface. He was not interested in helping Sabrina grow. He wanted to control her. Soon, Kevin got what he really wanted. Whenever they were alone, he exploited her in ways that Sabrina, so young, didn't know how to escape. But the worst was yet to come. One day, Sabrina needed to be rushed to the hospital for an appendectomy. Her appendix had burst, and the surgery was delicate. While she was recovering in the hospital, Kevin came to visit her. What should have been a moment of care and support turned into something terrible. There, in the hospital room, shortly after the surgery, Kevin abused Sabrina. The cruelty of this act left everyone who heard the story deeply outraged. But Kevin didn't stop there. He went further, extending his control over Sabrina. Every time they met, he talked about Lisa, his wife, manipulating the teenager. He distorted reality, making Sabrina believe that the only way for them to be together was to get rid of Lisa for good. Gradually, Kevin planted the idea that killing Lisa was the only way out. And somehow, Sabrina began to believe it. Then came the fateful day. Sabrina entered Lisa's room, ready to do what Kevin had convinced her to do. But something went wrong. Lisa woke up and saw Sabrina standing frozen in front of the bed. Panic overtook the young girl, and in a fit of rage, she lunged at her adoptive mother. Lisa and Megan, her biological daughter, tried to defend themselves, but Sabrina, already out of control, did not stop. When investigators Knoefel and Parmenter began to look into the case, they were unsure if they could trust Sabrina's story. After all, she could be making everything up. But unlike the typical behavior of someone lying, Sabrina was firm, confident, and consistent in her account. To prove she was telling the truth, she mentioned that a school friend, Autumn Pavlik, knew everything. The police went to Autumn, and surprisingly, she greeted them with a statement that left everyone stunned. "I was expecting you." Kevin had already spoken to Autumn about the plan to kill Lisa. The police then had an idea, to place a hidden microphone on Autumn and send her to confront Kevin. The meeting was tense. Autumn directly accused him of conspiring to kill Lisa and manipulating Sabrina to do so. What happened next was even more shocking. Kevin did not deny it. He said nothing. If he were innocent, he would have defended himself, would have asked, "What are you talking about?" But he remained silent. That silence was the evidence the police needed. With the testimonies of Sabrina and Autumn, Detective Parmenter acted quickly. He obtained an arrest warrant and went to Kevin's house. When they arrived, they found Kevin sleeping in Sabrina's room. The scene was strange and disturbing. Kevin was arrested without resistance. Kevin's arrest shook everyone around him. He was charged with conspiring to kill his wife, Lisa, with the help of Sabrina, his adoptive daughter. But that wasn't all. Kevin was also charged with sexual assault for having abused Sabrina all this time. The news of the arrest spread quickly. Megan, Lisa's daughter, learned about the arrest while having lunch with her father. He looked at her and said, "Kevin was arrested today." Megan, unsure of how to feel, simply replied, "Really?" She couldn't process the information. It was as if all her emotions were trapped inside her. At the trial, 12 witnesses took the stand. Teachers, social workers, friends, and family members of the Knoefels confirmed Kevin's suspicious behavior after the murder. Many of them had already noticed how he acted inappropriately with Sabrina, but no one imagined how far he would go. In the end, the truth came to light. Kevin, the man who was supposed to protect his family, had manipulated Sabrina into committing a terrible crime. He planned his wife's murder to collect the insurance money and continue his abusive relationship with the teenager. It was a story of betrayal, manipulation, and destruction, where the true victims only began to be seen when it was too late. David Strunk never imagined he would one day be testifying against his best friend. Kevin had always been someone he trusted, someone he could count on. But after Lisa's murder, everything changed. David still clearly remembered the weeks that followed the crime. Kevin, as if nothing had happened, insisted on showing him some photos of Sabrina, the girl he treated like a daughter, in suggestive modeling poses. That already seemed strange, but what really perplexed him was when Kevin started talking about visiting Sabrina in prison. He said he wanted her to know that he was still there for her, as if nothing had happened. David couldn't believe it. How could someone who had just taken his wife's life be so focused on staying in touch with Sabrina? As David tried to cope with this new reality, the jury was gathered, deliberating. It took 9 hours of discussion before they finally returned with a verdict. Prosecutor Karen Kowal knew they had won the case, but there was nothing satisfying about it. During an interview with journalist Josh Mankiewicz, he commented on the complexity of the case. "This is betrayal on top of betrayal, isn't it? Kevin betrayed Lisa, Sabrina betrayed Lisa, then Kevin betrayed Sabrina, and finally, Sabrina betrayed Kevin." Karen agreed, but with a caveat. "You forgot someone," she said. "No one was betrayed more than Megan." Megan, Lisa's daughter, was forced to witness everything. She tried to save her mother but couldn't. And now, the weight of that moment would be with her forever. Megan was not just a bystander. She was a victim. She saw her mother ripped from her life in a brutal manner and had carried that pain with her ever since. When Megan spoke about how she felt, her words were simple but full of emotion. "If I had to choose one emotion, it would be anger. A lot of anger. My mom did what she could to help people, to take care of the family, and they took that away from her. And they took that away from me too. I know they deserve justice, and the only justice I can give is to see them behind bars." Sabrina, who once was treated like part of the family, was now on the other side of the story. She pleaded guilty to all charges and, like Kevin, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole until 2042. But justice didn't stop there. In 2017, Megan and her sister Haley sued Kevin and Sabrina, winning over $6 million in damages. Even while imprisoned, Sabrina tried to redeem herself. In 2015 and again in 2020, she was interviewed, pleading for forgiveness from Megan and Haley. "I know there's more than one victim in this story," she said, her voice heavy with remorse. "If I could, I would tell them that I was selfish, that I'm very sorry. I never wanted to hurt them. I know it seems impossible to say that when I'm the one who took their mother away. But at that time, I was only thinking of myself. I was wrong. Nothing I say will bring Lisa back or erase what they felt. But if it means anything, I truly apologize." But for Megan, Apologies would never be enough. "You took that from me," she said firmly. "The pain of knowing my mom won't be there to see me get married, to meet my children. You robbed me of that." Despite all the pain, Megan found a way to turn her tragedy into strength. She grew up, became a determined woman, and followed in her mother's footsteps, who always wanted to help others. Megan decided to study criminal law, aiming to one day bring justice to other victims of violent crimes. For her, this was the best way to honor her mother's memory. "My mom just wanted to help people," Megan once said, "and I will keep doing that for her." Thus, Megan moved forward, carrying the pain with her, but also the determination to make a difference in the world. After all, that was the legacy her mother left behind: the desire to help, to care, and to turn suffering into something greater.